Hello everyone, my name is Pixlriffs and welcome back to the Minecraft Survival Guide. I hope you're all having a good day. In today's episode, we are back here with our little group of sniffers, but we're not going to be staying here for long. I'm just popping in to collect the seeds. Been doing a little bit more tree farming, and in the meantime, my sniffers have sniffed up a whole bunch of crops. As you can see, we've got a decent amount of pitcher pods and torchflower seeds. We could use those to breed more sniffers if we wanted to, but we're not going to focus any more on sniffers today. Instead, we're going to pay some attention to this over here, because unfortunately our super smelter has been dangling out here in the open air on this platform for a while. Today we will do something about that. We're going to build a blacksmith's house, and along the way I'm going to talk a little bit more about the process of building. Of course, we have been using the super smelter in the meantime, so I'm going to move all of these supplies out of the way, and we're going to take down the entire thing and rebuild it inside the house in a slightly different formation, because this house is actually going to be kind of arranged in an L shape. And I think after that, our next big project is going to be some sort of storage room, because goodness me, I have a lot of items now and very few places to put them all. Taking down these furnaces is also going to get me a bunch of experience from whatever they've been smelting in the meantime, so that's going to mend up a couple of my tools as we go. And with the automatic smelter taken down, the first thing I'm going to do is remove this entire floor, because we're going to rebuild it one block up. And the main reason we're doing that is because the floor of our starter house here actually starts one block up from the platform where you enter, so I figured it was going to be a good idea to establish the same pattern over here. If you're interested in building, one of the more important things to understand is the concept of a build style, a sort of theme for the area that you are building in. And the theme can be anything from the types of materials you choose to the types of shapes that you choose to put into your builds. And the best part of establishing this kind of build style is that it makes future builds in that area a lot easier, because they can follow similar patterns to the builds that you've already done. In this case, I'm going to be framing out this blacksmith's build, especially the upper floor, in the same style that I framed out the floors of our starter house. The basement is going to be made of stone, the upper section is going to be made of wood, with wood supports every 3 blocks over, and the roof is going to be framed in spruce, but we're going to make the roof out of a different material to give the build a different sort of character. But this house is going to differ in a bunch of fairly significant ways, because we're thinking about the thematic nature of building a blacksmith's house. So the color choices we make can be a little different. The way we choose to construct the building can be a little different. A blacksmith's house is almost certainly going to have a chimney, which we didn't build into our starter house because we didn't have an open fire or any kind of stove or something that would require a chimney to vent the smoke out of the roof. It just wasn't a design consideration in our starter house. This time around, it will be. And this time around, I'm not going to be doing a block by block tutorial of this house. I want you folks to take this build into your own hands and try and work with a theme, work with the kind of build style that you've already established in your own world, and see if you can build something else like it, but with some subtle differences. Along the way, I'm going to take the time to talk about how I texture builds, and about block choices and block palettes that you can put together as you build something like this. To start with, if I'm building something out of stone, I tend to build everything out of natural stone first, unless I have a different base block in mind, because natural stone is blank. It doesn't have a great deal of texture to it already. There's obviously this kind of static and lines and stuff in there, but compared to something like cobblestone, the texture of natural stone is a lot less busy, and so it can be a really nice blank canvas to work from, allowing you to go back later and pepper in little bits of detail here and there without the entire thing looking super busy from the beginning. We can make the supporting wall of this house feel a little bit like it's been put under strain by working in textures like cobblestone. Make it feel like the wall has been there a while, and stones have been kicked up against it, and a little bit more natural erosion has happened to the stuff that is bordering on the ground level. Whereas the wall further up can be a little smoother. We can even add in some stone bricks to provide a bit of extra texture, and honestly, 1 or 2 stone bricks dotted here and there in a wall can kind of trick the brain into thinking that the entire wall is made out of stone bricks, kind of the way a cartoonist will do little details in a cartoon in order to imply the bigger picture without it feeling too busy. Minecraft is, after all, kind of a cartoony game by default. None of the textures are especially realistic, and so sometimes it helps to lean into that. This section here, where I'm adjusting this log to make sure it matches the one on the opposite side, is going to be a bay window of sorts. It's a window that's going to stick out from the rest of the structure, so we're not building the wall to support that. We're going to have it supported from underneath by some logs and other little wood joinery pieces pieces. A couple of blocks in from the end of the wall here, we're actually going to frame out a doorway, and that's going to be kind of the tradesman's entrance, I guess. We'll have to make sure this is 3 blocks wide, because honestly, odd numbers work a lot better than even numbers when you're working with Minecraft builds, mostly because the standard Minecraft door is 1 by 2. It's 1 block wide, 2 blocks high. Naturally, if you wanted to, you could make it a double door, but then I find that the archways that you want to build over the top of it, let's make some more stone bricks as an example here. We want to maybe make the archway feel a little bit more detailed, so we're going to use stairs. If you end up building something on even numbers like this, if you build something 2 blocks wide, then the archway you have to build is reliant on this space here where the 2 stairs connect. It's never going to come to a precise point. The same is true of the roof ridge over here. If this was 2 blocks wide, it'd feel like kind of unnaturally wide in a sense. Like, it looks a lot better, to me at least, to have everything built on odd numbers like this. And we're going to do the same thing with this door here. We're going to set the door back into the wall, so we're going to have it in a different orientation here. We're actually going to widen this out so we get a 3-block archway, and we can have a single door in here surrounded by trapdoors. Spruce is an especially good material for doing this with, because the spruce trapdoor effectively looks similar to the spruce door but without the door handle. So if we end up placing a bunch of spruce trapdoors around the outside of this, holding shift to get those into position like so, they all kind of look like they are part of the door, even though the central part is the only functional bit. Having said that, we are going to set this 1 block back just so we can fit some stone brick stairs in here to make the archway of the door feel a little bit more curved. And here is a fun thing to note about doors. Whenever there's a solid block next to a door, it will always attach the hinge of the door to that side. For example, here, it's going to attach to this block on the right. But if you put a block on either side like this, or if you don't have a block either side, you just have something like trapdoors, the door isn't always going to know which block you want it to attach to, and sometimes you can end up with a door that opens in the direction you don't want. Here is a simple way of understanding that. If you look at the left-hand side of the block, as you place the door, the hinge is going to connect on the left-hand side. If you place it on the right-hand side of the block, on the right-hand half, it's always going to open on the right-hand side. And the same is going to be true over here. When we place it on this block, that way the door is going to open inwards to the right. And if we end up placing it the other way around, like so, it opens inwards to the left. Some people find these doors a little bit awkward to get through occasionally because of the alignment of the door and how wide the player is. So it's often a good idea to put a block next to the door that kind of aligns you as you go through. That way, if this barrel is here, I can kind of hug the right-hand side of the barrel and I can walk through the entrance in a slightly smoother way. Just a little quality of life touch that might be worth considering. Anyway, we've got a lot more building to do, so I might as well finish off the rest of this archway above the door. We're going to make some of this out of stone brick slabs as well. Having barrels like this around the build is also a really good place to leave extra resources if you're going to use them for the build, but your inventory's getting kind of full. Now, supporting the wooden structure above here, we're going to have a series of wood logs poking out from the wall on alternating blocks. In between each of these logs, we're going to replace the block of stone with a block of tuff, which is going to be a really subtle detail that you probably won't notice all that much from the outside, but this is going to create a kind of shadow. Here it is from the outside. It kind of creates a darker texture underneath each of these rows of logs, which kind of implies they are casting a shadow, even if you have the brightness in-game turned up to full. Especially from a distance, you won't really notice details like that, but they really help to give the build a little texture, light and dark areas. Well, those are the dark areas anyway. The light areas, we're going to use a bit of andesite to kind of highlight things like the corners of the building where the sun is going to catch that corner because there isn't much casting a shadow there. We'll add a little more to this corner here as well, and that can kind of blend down through the natural stone into cobblestone here on this corner. So with those details done, this is looking like quite a nice rustic wall. I'm going to fill in the other walls of this building, which aren't going to have as much going on, with the biggest difference being that I'm going to leave an entrance archway here, which is going to be one that we can ride the horses in through, as though the blacksmith can bring the horses around the back here, bring them into the forge area where they would be shoed. Or shod, I guess. Is that the right word for it? They would have horseshoes fitted. Around the base of the wall here, we can even use tuff as an extension of cobblestone. I think tuff looks honestly like a better cobblestone. It looks a bit more natural, whereas this has a lot of high contrast in it, which can really help the cobblestone stand out for better or for worse. And this section of the build here is going to have a chimney sticking out. That's going to indicate where the forge is on the inside, on the bottom floor, but it's also incidentally going to line up with where we're going to rebuild our automatic furnace array, our super smelter. Around this side where the other entrance is, we're going to keep the details relatively plain for now. I just want to have a kind kind of threshold here. And keeping these trapdoors here attached to the top side of this block, 2 blocks up from these trapdoors, means that it's not quite 2 blocks high, so it's going to be difficult for the average zombie to get in here. Baby zombies might, of course, but we're not going to be keeping anything too valuable in here that's going to be attacked by baby zombies anyway. Likewise, I think we're going to keep the archway here nice and simple. We're just going to bring it in a little bit with some stone slabs, just to round it off slightly. And now that all of the walls are built, we're going to continue that motif of having supporting blocks all the way around the outside on alternating blocks. Incidentally, builds like this are why I always end up chopping wood on a weekly basis in my Minecraft world, because you can never have enough, especially when it comes to spruce wood. We aren't going to worry too much about the details of the forge for now. We can fill that stuff in a little bit later, but for now we are going to fill in this giant hole in the floor where the terrain isn't quite level. We can adjust a couple of the torches inside of here to make sure the area stays lit up when we start building the floor over it, because that's really the next step. As I mentioned, the floor of the house is going to start 1 block up here, and we're going to have a slab at the entrance, which I should have on me right there. There we go. That's where the door is going to lead into the main part of the house, where we are going to house our automatic smelter. And I was talking earlier about using little motifs, like the fact that this house has mangrove wood and a mangrove door, with the steps leading up to it and the block above being mangrove. I might reverse that for this door, making the side walls mangrove whilst making the door and the steps up to it out of spruce wood. But the floor within is almost certainly going to be made out of spruce wood. We got loads of it, so we can just use this to fill out the floor. Of course, if you want to, you can use slabs. It cuts down on the amount of materials. You probably want to use top half slabs though, because you want to be able to place full blocks on the floor naturally and not have them float or anything like that if you want to put down a crafting table or a bed or anything in here. So you'll still probably want to use full blocks around the edges of the room like so, just to make sure that it doesn't feel like the entire floor is floating above the supporting walls. Personally, for blocks as cheap as spruce wood is, I just find it easier to work with solid blocks. It feels cleaner. You don't end up with so much mess that way. So that's the floor of the house all finished. And when I was designing this in my creative test world, originally I just wanted the floor to be long enough that we would end up being able to rebuild our automatic smelter block for block the way it was before, with a long platform. And then I settled on this L-shaped design and decided to bend the automatic smelter around this chimney that we're going to be building in the corner. So we're going to rebuild that a little bit later, and you'll see how the design of that can be adjusted so you can adapt it to a slightly different shaped space. For now though, we're going to need to smelt a couple of stacks of the sand we brought back from our Sniffer expedition, because we're going to need some glass for the windows. And here is where we come back to what I was saying earlier about build styles and adapting the same pieces of builds to different shapes and different materials. In this case, we're going to be building the window areas, the sort of wall segments of the build, exactly the same as we built them in our original starter house. Each of these pillars is going to be 5 blocks tall. We're going to fill the interior space between those with 2 rows of stripped oak logs, like so. We're going to fill in the space in between that with glass. And then either side of that oak log, we're going to have these 2 spruce logs sticking out. We're going to run another spruce log over the top of that, and that's going to support the structure of the roof. The way this is going to differ is that we're going to use acacia trapdoors as the window shutters instead of the oak trapdoors that we used in our starter house. And the reason for that is another thematic one, actually. It comes down to the design of the blast furnace block. We want this to be a blacksmith, and the blast furnace has these 3 apertures in the front that light up whenever it's smelting anything. We're not necessarily going to be using blast furnaces in our automatic smelter, but I liked the, I guess, symmetry, the harmony of having these 3 open sections of the acacia trapdoor texture. Now, there are a couple of places on this build, for example, either side of what's going to be the door frame here, where we only have a 1 block wide space, and we could do a smaller version of these windows if we wanted to, but I've decided to do something different. We're going to fill these in with stone brick walls, like so. And I think that's a good way of making this house feel a little bit sturdier than this one. Like, the blacksmith's house is built out of a little bit more structurally sound material, unlike these hippies next door who built their entire roof out of moss blocks. We're also going to do the same thing on each of these corners where I've left the andesite blocks. I think that just adds a nice roundness to the corners of this build. At this point, because we've done all of this before when we built the starter house, filling filling in the rest of these windows is going to be very simple. Even the bay window here at the front of the building is going to follow exactly the same design. In some cases, like these corners, I am going to leave a wall completely blank without a window in it, and that's largely because the automatic smelter is going to go in front of this, so you wouldn't really be able to see in and out much anyway. Okay, so we are now at the point where I've done basically everything I can on the ground floor and the upper floor. We now need to start putting the roof in. I've done the same thing, following the same sort of template as I did with the starter house here. I've ended up making a ridge around the outside made out of spruce slabs, and now I'm working on a sort of gradient of colors for the roof, actually. This one is just one material with bands of bamboo around it, but I wanted to evoke a warmer palette for the blacksmith's house, and so I figured we could start with something like mangrove wood as a base, right? Mangrove wood, obviously a warmer color by default. It's very red. We're already using a bit of mangrove in these other houses, so it sort of fit. But when I was assembling this in a creative test world, I sort of didn't like the entire roof being made out of mangrove planks. It feels too uniform. It's going to be quite a large roof because this is quite a large house. It needed something a little extra. And so I decided to try out a gradient of sorts to decorate the roof with, and that's going to be a gradient from blocks of coal, which are obviously very thematic for the world of the blacksmith, going through into blackstone and then cherry logs. Now you'll notice that blackstone and cherry logs actually have a bit more in common than you might expect, because you expect blackstone to be a lot darker like coal is and a lot more of a true black and grey, whereas if you look at it closely, it's actually got some elements of purple in it that are really brought out by the cherry wood. From there we can go to crimson planks, which are a much brighter, closer to a beetroot kind of color, and then from there we can go to mangrove planks, and so we end up with this really nice gradient that starts off at coal and ends up in this nice, warm, rich red. The other advantage to 3 of these blocks is that they also have slabs available for the same texture, and the texture kind of combines. It tiles very well. It smoothly transitions from the block to the slab, meaning that if we make the roof out of a 1.5 block pitch, if we end up sort of doing a single block and then a slab on top of it, and then going up and doing a single block there and a slab on top of that, and so on and so forth, we can end up with a slightly different roof pitch than the one we have up here. The problem, of course, being that we need to artfully work in the cherry logs and the coal blocks, because neither of those have slabs available for those materials. But we're going to build those up on the roof in stripes. The first thing, though, is I have to go and collect a lot more materials, because while I think I have a reasonable amount of blackstone and I've been farming mangrove wood, so I definitely have a lot of that, this is all the crimson wood I possess. I'm not certain I'm going to have enough cherry logs for this entire build, and I certainly need more coal blocks, even though we're going to be using those relatively sparingly, since they are technically a precious resource. So I'm going to drop these off in my supply chest here, where I've been collecting some of the materials as I go, and we are going to go searching for coal, a bunch of crimson wood that we can farm, and probably gather a bit more blackstone and a bit more cherry wood just for good measure. Fortunately, we are able to farm crimson wood at home because we have access to crimson nylium. I can grab the fungus from here, I can grab some bone meal, and we can make sure that we have a little bit of extra netherrack, because there is a trick to spreading nylium to make sure that you can grow a crimson fungus on it. Add a couple of netherrack blocks either side of your nylium block, and bone meal the netherrack blocks to spread the nylium. In addition to that, we can bone meal the nylium here in order to get a few more crimson fungi, and so this becomes a very easily renewable wood source. Not to mention it also gives us a couple of shroom lights, and I should really get myself a diamond hoe to make sure I can take down this canopy of nether wart blocks. Luckily, I already had a diamond hoe that I was using to remove the leaves of the mangrove trees I was harvesting, and these nether wart blocks can actually be used for a variety of things, not least that they can be composted. I can use our farmer villager's composter here as an example. If we right-click on this with the nether wart blocks, the compost level slowly builds up until it gives us a single piece of bone meal, which I think the farmer just picked up, so it's probably not the best idea to compost things while he's around. Instead, for the mangrove leaves, I've been using the simple setup of 2 hoppers feeding into the top of 2 composters. The hoppers underneath collect the bone meal that they produce and put that in this chest here, where clearly they've been producing a decent amount of bone meal from all of those mangrove leaves. And then if we just put these nether wart blocks in the top chest, chest here, it'll get filtered down through the hoppers and produce bone meal for us. We can also do the same with the crimson roots and the weeping vines that we get from this process, so it's nice and easy to get hold of a lot of crimson wood very quickly. And incidentally, if you've upgraded your hoe to have efficiency 5, you should be able to mine these nether wart blocks instantly, making it a lot easier to clean up the debris from when these trees grow. Okay, a bit of resource grind later, we now have most of the stuff that we should need to build this roof. I'm going to start with a pass of blackstone and coal blocks, and we'll build the roof up from there. Might need to go and get some more cherry logs, but I have a decent amount of those in storage, and I can always stop to farm some trees if I really need to. I've been using scaffolding to get up and down from this build. Scaffolding is kind of an acquired taste, I have found. Not too many people are keen on using it, but I find it really useful for easy access to higher up areas of builds. And so I'll be doing a full episode about scaffolding, maybe to demystify some of the aspects of how to use it. Along the roof line here, we're going to be building with blackstone. I might mix the coal blocks in later just so I can be sparing about them and make sure they are being used where they are visible. Because this section here is actually going to continue the bay window up into a stone tower that's just going to be resting on the side here, so I want to make sure that all of the aspects of that are going to be somewhat visible. Unlike the starter house, which has a pretty straightforward roof shape, the roof ends are at the north and south faces of the build. This one is going to have a slightly different thing. It's going to be an L shape, and so the ends like this are going to be facing south and east. That means on this face of the house, at least, we just have to go around a corner and connect up with the roof line on the opposite side. Thanks to this row of slabs around the outside, this gives the impression of being 1.5 blocks high. So we're actually going to continue this over 1 block, and we're going to make this next section 1.5 blocks high by breaking some of the blackstone down into slabs and layering those on top of here. That in turn allows us to give the impression that the cherry logs are also 1.5 blocks high by starting them behind this slab so that you can only see half a block showing behind that. So that means we get a decent amount of the roof out of the cherry logs before we have to switch to a different material to make sure that it maintains the pitch of the roof. Because I really liked the end pattern of this roof, and it's kind of a shame that it's getting covered up by the roof line of this house, at least from certain angles, we're going to do a similar pattern on the edge of this roof where these spruce slabs are. What that means is that the cherry log end texture might be visible through those slabs unless we make it into these 6-sided cherry wood textures. The other thing about the cherry logs here is that we are placing them horizontally so that the bark stripe pattern is vertical, and even though the other textures in the build won't necessarily line up with that, I kind of like the impression that gives. The verticality of the texture adds to the idea that this is a sloped roof. It's just a shame we can't do that with the crimson planks because those are the next texture we're going to add here. And that looks like a thunderstorm, so I better go get some sleep. It's just kind of a shame we can't get that same vertical texture out of crimson planks because that's the next material we're going to add. We're going to add crimson slabs on top of the cherry logs here. They blend together really well, actually. And we're going to start the crimson planks a couple of blocks into this next row of cherry logs just to give the impression that the roof material blends together a little bit. We might even remove a couple of the blocks from along here and replace those with blackstone to kind of smooth out the gradient a little bit and make it a little less uniform. And then at the end here in this back corner is really where we're going to place some of our blocks of coal. This also works out for the shadows of the build a little bit because this is going to be adjoining the tower here, so it's going to give the impression that there's a darker corner in the roof over here. Naturally, the next row of material is going to be crimson planks, and we can save on those planks actually by making the inside ones slabs and just leaving a plank on the very end here. We'll cover that up with another row of planks across the top, and then we are going to begin the next section of the roof as planks, maybe with some slabs on top, and then transition that into mangrove once it gets a little closer to this end. Then finally, the central roof ridge is going to line up with the middle of the house over here, and that's just going to be mangrove planks. We could add some more roof adornment here. We are going to add that spruce frame along this end of the house, but I kind of like the fact that since it starts at a lower elevation than our starter house, the roof line doesn't quite come up as high, even though this is a taller build. And when we step back and look at it from a distance, I really like the gradient of this roof. It's a really beautiful set of colors, and I think they line up pretty well. So we're going to border the rest of the roof with those. Like I said, might have to go and get some more materials if we run out of them. There's not a huge amount of blackstone here, but hey, my nether spawn is in a basalt delta. I should be able to get it pretty easily. The impression that it gives is perhaps a little bit artsy and quite radically different from the roof of our starter house, but enough stylistic elements remain the same that I think it passes off pretty well as the build style of this area. Okay, we're back. We have a complete roof. In fact, the entire exterior of this house is now done. And it's interesting that it's difficult to see from certain angles, so the roof isn't going to feel overwhelming with color when we're down here on the ground. But if we get up a little higher, you really start to see where the colors of the roof pop out. And this face is probably the most boring out of all of them. It doesn't have much adornment, doesn't have any extra windows or towers or the chimney or anything, but the fact that it's against this house means we're not going to be seeing that side of the building too much anyway. This style of roof design is actually relatively new to me. I don't tend to use all of these different colors in roofs all that much, but I've been studying some of the builders that I really love, like Gemini Tay and Mythical Sausage, and a lot of the time they tend to put really bold colors into their roofs and use these gradients to really transition between blocks. Some unusual block choices as well, which is actually pretty refreshing. Incidentally, the roof doesn't look too bad from the inside either. It's very pink up there in the rafters, but I kind of like it. And from further away, I think this is going to give a really nice impression. Up here on the mountain, for example, these two houses obviously feel a lot smaller and they sit together quite nicely. Plus, you lose all of the noise in the texture of the black stone and you're looking more at the color than you are the material from this far away. And I think that looks really nice. We also tend to think of texture in Minecraft as the kind of stuff I was doing on the lower wall of the house there, the kind of speckling in of different blocks to try and give a flat surface a bit more life. But in this case, think of what we're doing with the roof here as brush strokes, kind of like you're painting with a paintbrush, as opposed to the speckling in, the kind of checkerboarding that we tend to do with some other textures. I think this kind of painterly style really suits the surroundings, this kind of idyllic area with these rolling hills and cherry blossom trees and a picturesque mountain. I think it suits the area pretty well. One small addition I want to make to this build is to include a campfire in the chimney, along with a hay bale so that we can get the maximum height out of our column of smoke. So I'll scaffold up the chimney from the inside, kind of like a reverse Santa Claus maneuver, I guess, and we'll maybe leave a gap of 1 block at the top, but we'll place the hay bale there, knock this block out so that we can stand up on here without burning our feet on the campfire, and then the smoke is going to rise from this chimney at the back of the house. Gonna drop on down here, trying to use a water bucket to catch me as I fall. There we go. And from the back here, you can see that the chimney is now merrily smoking away, with a little bit of spruce wood around the outside to kind of provide a border for the chimney against the roof. Now, I haven't done a great deal to the interior of the house yet. In fact, there are some areas that probably still need lighting up just to make sure that monsters won't spawn there during the day or night. But in this case, the main priority is going to be re-establishing that automatic smelter that we had on the platform here at the beginning of the episode. And as I mentioned, we are going to vary the design of the smelter a little bit to account for the fact that this house is an L shape. I kind of want to design it so it goes around this corner, and that way this chimney being in the corner makes sense to be the chimney for the automatic smelter, as well as potentially the forge below if we end up building something down there. So we're going to have the furnaces arranged in an L shape like this, and we're going to have to make sure that each of them can be fed with hoppers. They need fuel input and item input, and they need to have the items they've smelted taken away by hoppers. But all of that should be relatively straightforward. We can have the arms of the furnaces extending outwards into the room here. We can place the hoppers into the back of it if we leave 1 block of room at the back there. We're going to have the whole system output into a barrel, which we're going to place there. And you might think that doesn't seem like enough storage for an automatic smelter, but remember, we're feeding this with chest minecarts, so we can only put in as many items as will fit in the inventory of a single chest. We'll put the input hoppers back along here as well, and all we need to do to connect each of these up is apply the minecart rails and just have it turn a corner. So our powered rails can go along here until it has to turn a corner, where we'll need to use a regular rail for that motion. I think we're actually going to feed it from this side, just so this area over here by the door isn't too cluttered, and I'll use a couple of these to manually smelt a little bit more stone so we can keep using the smooth stone for this, but the input line is going to come down here. The fuel input line will stay up there, and the item input line stays down here. We just need to make sure we've got 1 lever to power both of the minecarts, and of course that the rails up here need to be powered. I will need 1 lever for each section of the track here because it now turns a corner, so we'll need to put another lever on top of that one as well. Could do this with blocks of redstone if we wanted to, but I think this looks pretty elegant. And obviously this all looks very mechanical sat here in the middle of the room, but I feel like we could dress this up in future and make it look even nicer. But I think honestly, just having a proper house for this is something that I can be really happy about. And hopefully you folks have learned a little bit more about the process and theory of building through this episode. But that is where we are going to leave it for this episode of the Minecraft Survival Guide. Really happy to have done some more building in this world, and this is only the beginning. So folks, don't forget to leave a like on this video if you enjoyed it. Subscribe if you want to see more, and I'll see you folks soon. Take care. Bye for now.